Hello and welcome, and I hope you're doing well today. I wanted to take a moment and cover some tips in food photography and focus specifically on fruits and vegetables in this case as our subject matter. And before we get started, I wanted to also mention that this will be very basic. I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of information that can be discouraging, especially if you're a beginner. So I wanted to make this as simple as I possibly can and offer uh, some encouragement to you, especially as someone who doesn't really consider photography to be my expertise. But with that said, even though it's not my specialty, I will say that I've had a lot of experience taking pictures over the years, especially when it comes to promoting my art and pottery business. So I've had a camera on hand a lot and have been used to taking lots of pictures. And in my mind, I know what makes a good picture, but a lot of people don't. So I just wanted to be able to share that experience with you, and hopefully you'll be able to take that with you today and find it helpful. But before we go on to the next slide, let's think for a moment about our subject matter. Why are we focusing on fruits and vegetables today as our subject matter? Well, for one thing, they are non-moving. It's always easy to take pictures of non-moving items. And another reason is because they're eye-catching in appearance. They're very diverse in how they look. No two vegetables look just alike, and that means that they're also very organic. So they're not really perfect in the way they're shaped and they're formed. So that just uh, makes a photograph look unique if you have fruits and vegetables in it. And just the color alone is very eye catching. They're very diverse in color. So that's always a good subject matter to start out with if you're a beginner in photography. So we can take note of that as we go forward. So as we move into the next slide, let's think about the devices that we can use. For one thing, you don't need a lot of fancy equipment to take decent pictures. So you don't have to go out and spend a lot of money on high-tech cameras and that sort of thing. One option that is available to you is a point and shoot if you don't already have one. And unless you have access to a professional camera, these particular cameras are more affordable. It can still allow you to take good pictures. Just remember, folks, that no matter what you use, composition, good lighting, and practice will always be your key to clear, effective results. So, in other words, when you take pictures, the camera isn't doing all the work. I mean, yes, cameras come built with all these unique features and characteristics that allow you to take good pictures. But what also matters is your eye visually for the subject matter that you're trying to capture. So if you have a good eye for that, that makes a difference. And what also makes a difference is, for instance, the lighting of the day, depending on what time that is. And I'll go over that here in just a little bit in a different slide, but just wanted to make you aware of that before we go too much further. Another device is what most of us are familiar with, and that is a cell phone. They are very effective, especially the latest versions, but due to their lenses being much smaller than that of standard cameras, this ability is more limited depending on the size of your pictures when printing them. So in this case, many cell phones will enable you to capture images that can be printed as 4 by 6 inches and 5 by 7 inches with clear results. And any larger images than that will usually appear grainy. The best way for me to describe this is that in the lens of a camera on your cell phone, um, there are a certain amount of pixels in that lens that will allow you to create a really good picture, but when it's printed in a small size, it's going to look clear. But if it's any larger than that, there aren't enough pixels in the lens to make it appear clear if you print them off um, in larger sizes. So I just wanted to point that out there. That's what you run into with cell phones. But with that said, there's a lot of unique features with a cell phone. They come built with a lot of really interesting settings that you can use to make good pictures. So as we move on, another important aspect to photography is obviously keeping your camera still. And in order to capture the most clear, effective results, we have to break our comfort zone at times by standing, sitting, or lying down in various poses. Now, obviously, when you take pictures, you want to take pictures of different angles of your subject matter, and this requires you to move around the room or whatever setting that you're in certain ways to do that. So sometimes we have to get on the ground, and sometimes we have to stand, and sometimes we have to lie down, and that can physically be uncomfortable depending on, for instance, how hard the floor is when you're sitting on it or standing on it or lying down on it. You can just imagine all these different settings that you can be in that can be more comfortable than others. But whenever you take pictures, be aware that the more comfortable you are, the more likely you are to keep the camera steady so that you can get clear, crisp pictures. So that may be self-explanatory, but I think it always helps to be reminded of that. So we are going to move on and talk about another important term, and this is contrast. It's important that we understand contrast even in photography and not just in other art forms, because this relates to matching colors in your in whatever you're trying to capture, but not just matching colors. This will also help you understand that separating your subject matter from your background and your surrounding things in the picture will make a big difference for the overall quality of your picture. So successful photography will always rely on contrast. Before taking the first picture, be aware of colors that are surrounding your subject matter. And what I'll also mention is that this is a color wheel. Some of you may be familiar with this. Some of you may have heard the term complementary. And complementary colors are perfect matches with each other. So if you look at colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel, that means that particular color is their perfect match. So for instance, yellow is complementary to purple, orange is complementary to blue, and red is complementary to green. So think about this even in regard to photography. If your subject matter is yellow, uh, focus on these deeper tones here for your surrounding areas, whether that be the surface that your subject matter is sitting on or even a backdrop. And we'll explain that kind of thing, backdrops and surfaces, um, in future clips. But as far as understanding contrast goes, you want to be able to separate the two. So for instance, if bananas are your subject matter, avoid props and or surfaces that are yellow and instead focus on surrounding colors that are opposite or significantly different from that particular color or colors that are similar. So we don't have to follow this color wheel to a T in regard to photography. Yes, you can think of surroundings that are purple to help your yellow stand out if, for instance, bananas are your subject matter. But you can focus on deeper tones than this in your surroundings to help this stand out if you need to. With that said, you can also think about neutrals, which are whites, blacks, browns, blacks, uh, or whites, blacks, browns, and maybe grays. If that is your choice, those particular tones will help your subject matter stand out. This is just a way for your viewer to be able to separate your focus from other elements in the image. And again, I'll explain this in a little bit more detail whenever I share pictures in the next few clips. So this is another important one. It's finding your subject matter, of course. You want to have something in mind before you actually begin to take pictures. In regard to fruits and vegetables, I recommend that you gather some that are appetizing in appearance and also eye-catching overall. And look for those with bright colors. If you're including different kinds of fruits and vegetables in the same image, look for those also with contrasting colors. And as we reviewed in the last slide, um, even with your subject matter, contrasting colors can make a difference for how unique your picture can be. One example are red tomatoes with green peppers. And as we reviewed in the color wheel, red is green's complement, so red and green naturally complement each other. So even though we're not focusing on surroundings in this clip and just on subject matter, you can mix and match elements of your subject matter in complementary ways. So red tomatoes with green peppers are a good example of that. Now, also look for texture, and a good example of that would be the characteristics or markings on the peel of a fruit or a vegetable, and apples are a good example of that too. There are a wide range of apples that you can use in your subject matter that have different looks on them. And another example would be how the surface of a peel feels and also how it looks, and the porous surface of an orange peel is a good example of that, not to mention the color that it is. Okay, so now we're going to move on to props, which ties into choosing locations and or surfaces that will make for good contrast, and your advantage for that will depend will vary depending on what makes for good contrast. So for outdoor settings, good props will be trees and leaves. And depending on the color of your subject matter, you can complement those two aspects or those two elements that way. If you're taking pictures indoors, a lot of people choose neutral colored walls for their background to help their subject matter stand out. So again, in regard to neutrals, white tones, light gray tones, brown tones, black tones, um, anything that's a neutral will help your subject matter stand out. Another thing to consider are surfaces. These are just things to put your items on or your subject matter on. And that can vary as far as wood grain to fabrics and table coverings, if that is your choice. Those make for those give you very effective results when handled in the right way. Just be careful to avoid those things that will make your overall picture look too busy, because certain wood grains, as beautiful as they are, can be so prominent that they can distract from your subject matter. And fabrics and table coverings are also the same way in that regard if the pattern on the fabric is elaborate. So try to be as subtle with these kinds of things as you can be to help your subject matter stand out, and be aware of that. So this is one of my examples in regard to props, and it can go two ways as far as my subject matter, but since we're focusing on fruits and vegetables today, the potatoes in this case are our subject matter. But as a potter, this is, to my personal benefit, something different. If I were sharing this in a way that promotes pottery, obviously the eyes are going to draw into the pottery aspect of it. Or in other words, the root vegetable keeper more specifically that is around these potatoes. But if you're looking for vegetables, the potatoes are obviously there as well. So with that said, supporting objects and or containers for this particular picture happens to be the pottery, and the surface that this is sitting on is a rustic wooden table. And the background is a shrub, and notice that the shrub is obviously green, but what color is the other part of this picture when we think of the items that are in it? I see red in the clay. Well, what is green's complement? Red is, right? So that was intentional. I chose this particular item to be in the picture to just to be supportive and complementary so that it would stand out. Another example is this one, and the subject matter in this case is a banana pepper, or more than one banana peppers actually, banana peppers with yellow grape tomatoes. And the surface happens to be the same rustic wooden table that I showed you in the last slide. And the supporting objects and or containers happen to be the pottery, and I have two bowls here in this case. So this is another example for props. Find whatever looks eye-catching to you. I'm not presenting this in a way to promote my pottery in a sense, but I already had these pictures taken at one time to help promote my pottery. So I thought I would go ahead and use that for this. And the red glaze that's in the bowls just helps with the contrast. So as we move on, two important terms to keep in mind is lighting and composition. And of all there is to learn about photography, you'll be surprised at how your skills will significantly develop through these two terms alone. And from then on, practice will evolve and improve your skills. So let's explain lighting and composition a little bit. Lighting is important because uh, it makes one of the largest differences in how your picture will look in the end. So I would recommend that you choose areas with good lighting and consider the following options. When you're taking pictures indoors, do so preferably in daylight next to a window or directly under a lamp for interesting cast shadows. This helps achieve depth. If you're taking pictures outdoors and in the middle of the day, do so preferably in a shaded area or when the sky is overcast. Otherwise, your best opportunities are 1 hour after sunrise and 1 hour before sunset if taking pictures in direct sunlight. In other words, this is known as the golden hour for those of you who didn't know. And in most scenarios, also turn off your flash setting to avoid making your subject matter appear washed out. After all, if you have good lighting, you really never, you rarely ever, you rarely never really need the flash setting. Flash is good at times, but in regard to capturing all aspects of your fruit and vegetables, you want to depend on good natural lighting rather than a flash. So here's one example for lighting, and the subject matter are oranges. And this was taken in the middle of the day, and it was also taken indoors, but I took it inside of a window just so that I can get these interesting cast shadows that you see beneath the oranges here. And the natural lighting enhanced the highlights on the glossy appearance of these peels. So that's what natural lighting does in an indoor setting. So we're moving on to another example for lighting, and this one happens to be of apples. I took this in the middle of the day and I took it outdoors, but the only difference is I took it on a shaded porch and also in the middle of the day. So is it okay to take pictures in the middle of the day outdoors? Yes, it is, but you can also take that picture when it's either overcast or if you're in a shaded area. And also notice the surroundings of this picture. I have the surface that it's on, which is the gray rustic wooden table that helps, that's a neutral, and that helps my subject matter, or in other words, the red color of my subject matter stand out. Okay, so we're moving on to composition, and this is important. In addition to contrast and good lighting, balance and variety should also be considered. So composition also consists of good balance and offering variety to make a picture look more interesting. And these are just a few things to keep in mind. You want to avoid overcrowding a picture with too many items or objects that distract from the subject matter or focus. So don't put too much of one thing in one area and not enough in the other side of it. Try to scatter things about and make them balanced. Also, it is often suggested that when choosing a very small number of objects to be your focus, arrange them in amounts of odd numbers. So if you're just focusing on, for instance, a group of apples, um, try to take pictures of 3 apples or 5 apples or 7 apples and so forth. Naturally, odd numbers um, draw in more attention. So, and the next thing, in the next slide, I want to talk about the rule of thirds, and this will also help with balance. And I took this definition from Wikipedia. This guideline proposes that an image should be imagined as divided into 9 equal parts by 2 equally spaced horizontal lines and 2 equally spaced vertical lines. And that is important. It's important compositional, and that important compositional elements should be placed along these lines or these intersections. So in other words, this is set up like a tic-tac-toe board. And the oranges in this case are located more within the second and third column and not directly in the center. And this is for aesthetics, while still arranged and placed in a balanced way that doesn't overcrowd or leave too much empty space on any side of the picture. So think of these the 2 sections to the right here as columns, okay? And think of the ones going horizontally as rows. In the 2 right columns, you'll notice that most of the subject matter is in those sections and not as much over here. So you can tell that these 3 oranges are not directly in the center. Now, with that said, there is some negative space over here, but I tried to crop this down in a way to where there wasn't too much negative space, but just enough room to offset the subject matter. Now, if I were to take this picture where the edge of this picture was way over here somewhere, that would be a lot of negative space and would be too distracting. It would distract me from the subject matter. So I would have to crop that down to something similar to how this looks. Now, with that said, in order to capture all 3 oranges, I wanted to create some margins on the other side and not put the edge next to the edge of the oranges, if that makes sense, or the edge of the picture leaning up or up against the edge of the oranges. Provide a little bit of space if you can, if you want all 3 of your objects or oranges to be seen. And also, again, these are 3 oranges, so I did this on purpose so that 3 would help draw in the eye. And that's just a close-up of that. Now, from here on out, I just want to show you some more pictures of other arrangements that I've made. And just wanted to point out and review what we've already talked about. Here's an arrangement of some tomatoes, peppers, and okra. And it's also on a plate, which is pottery. It's another plate that I've made to help promote both my pottery business and also just to show how it contrasts with these vegetables. Notice how in the glaze there's a deep green, bluish color, and like I said, with the color wheel, that contrasts nicely with red. So that was also done intentionally. And the surface that it's sitting on is the same wooden table that we've seen so far. Also gray in color. It's a neutral, and it stands out against everything else in the picture. When you draw in your eye, or when you look at the subject matter of the fruits and vegetables, what draws in your eye most? And this is kind of a psychological question because it's also a way of asking, does red draw your eye in more or does green draw your eye in more? Well, for me personally, red does. And I'm looking at these 2 tomatoes and the red pepper first before I look at anything else. Now, with that said, how many items that are red are in this picture? Or how many vegetables that are red are here? I'm counting 3. Again, that was done intentionally because I wanted odd numbers to stand out in this case. So that's just one example, and we're going to move on to another one. So we have two bowls, and our subject matter are banana peppers and yellow grape tomatoes. Now these two tomatoes, or these two bowls, I mean, are pretty close to the center of the entire picture, which was my intention. But are the vegetables in the center? No, because I have. If we were thinking of this in regard to the rule of thirds, the peppers are more towards the left, and the uh, tomatoes are more towards the right, and I really don't have any vegetables that are directly in the center. So I tried to take the rule of thirds into consideration as far as that goes. Again, let's review the surface. We have the gray rustic table for our surface that these elements are sitting on. Also, we have the green shrub in the background to complement the red and the clay, and also the red and the glaze of the bowls. Now look back here. I have a green bell pepper, and this is not too big of a deal, but I could change. If I had one thing to change about this picture, um, I would do this. I would maybe make this green pepper red so that it helps stand out against the background. But since we have enough action going on in the foreground here with the banana peppers and the tomatoes, this really isn't necessary because that pepper is really not the focus. But that's something I could have done, but at the same time, all of this still works. Okay, so things are looking a little more subtle here. There's not as much color, but our subject matter is a sweet potato, and I have several there on display. And the same plate that we've seen before, that some of these are on, as well as the plate is my prop, and I've also included um, the gray rustic wooden table for the surface that these items are sitting on, or these elements for that matter. So the gray stands out against the potatoes, which the potatoes lean more towards red than they do a more neutral tone like brown, but still enough towards red or towards a color in general to stand out against the neutral tone. There's also some green in the plate. The green stands out against the red pigments in the sweet potatoes. And you can't see very much of the shrub in the background, but some of that is there. And this in the background here was kind of a happy accident. This is the concrete of my porch, but it's also a neutral color, and it stands out against the edge of this potato here. So we've got a couple more to show, and I will conclude the lesson for today. This one zooms in on the tomatoes and some of the banana pepper. Um, Again, we're showing this bowl again, or one of the bowls that we've seen so far. The other one is turned upside down in the foreground here, and that was done intentionally. But my camera was able to zoom in on this right here to focus on the vegetables. And it takes my focus away from this in the foreground, which is blurred. And if your camera has a portrait setting or some kind of focal setting, you'll be able to zoom in on this and do that. You can see some of the background here, which is green. Even though it's blurry, it still complements the red in the bowl as well as the glaze of the bowl. So this is the last picture that I want to share, and it focuses on the two bowls that we've seen so far, as well as the banana peppers and the grape tomatoes. And let's think about how this picture is balanced. Well, I arranged the peppers in a way to where they were scattered around. The one that's over here was done on purpose, partly because I wanted to scatter the peppers around, but at the same time, this one is more uniquely shaped than the other peppers, just because it's curved in more, and it stood out in more ways than these others did. So I wanted this one off to itself so that that one can be noticed. In regard to the tomatoes, I have one over here just to add to the balance and make this overall picture look eye-catching, to show that balance is there. And I have a cluster of tomatoes here in this bowl. Um, I didn't put any in this bowl just because I wanted to show off some of the glaze, the red color in that, just to help with the aesthetics of the entire picture, just to help draw in the colors. But still, there's more uh, vegetables in this picture than there is pottery, so naturally your eyes draw in more towards the um, the vegetables than the pottery and other surroundings of this picture, or at least that was my goal. So with this said, and also by the way, how many peppers are in this picture? Count them. I'm counting 5. So again, odd numbers really draw in attention. So again, just keep that in mind. And I'm going to jump off here and we'll continue um, another photography segment in a future clip or a future video um, and focus on a different subject. But I really enjoyed um, talking about photography today and talking about fruits and vegetables. It's one of my favorite subject matters just because of how eye-catching they look. And I wanted to mention too that this can be explained in a separate video in the future. It's a free editing program for enhancing your pictures. So the link is there for that if you're ever interested in downloading it. And always remember, folks, that like any other art form, when you take pictures, the most important thing is to have fun. That's what's going to help you improve your photography skills. So lots of practice, have fun with it, and you will do just fine. Now, again, if you have any questions for me, feel free to contact me, and I will provide you with any other information that I wasn't able to give you today or answer any questions that you may have for me. And with that said, we'll jump off here and have a good day.